Do y'all remember the slow clap in movies and TV shows? They tried really hard to make the slow clap a thing in the 80s and 90s. And if you don't remember movies from back then, let me just bring you up to speed. You're sitting there and there's a bunch of people and it's just the right moment and the right conversation and the right lighting and somebody says something or something goes down and there's this profound instant of mutual recognition. Like everybody gets something at once. It dawns on them and something happens. Like lives are changed. But listen to how much I'm struggling to quantify that. You can't really package it up and be like, oh, this is just what it was like. It's just unpackageable. So in filmmaking, TV shows and stuff, they introduced the slow clap. And that was the thing where somebody gets up and they say something that's brave and difficult. And then one person, usually the person who was portrayed as being against those ideas earlier, kind of gets this confused look on their face. And then this moment of slowly nodding and recognizing that they were wrong about everything all along. And then they stand up. And they start to clap slowly because it's like it's dawning on them. And then it's like, yeah, oh yeah, that was the most important thing that's ever been said ever. And then everybody else joins in and it's a moment. And then the music swells and I don't know. I never really felt like those totally worked. And then eventually became a joke and was mocked. And social media tried their hand at that. I think the social media version of the slow clap is the thing where it's like, well, we went to this thing and somebody said ideas that were bad. And my 3-year-old stood up and just yelled out this thing that was true. And everyone cried and then they clapped. And we all learned something important about ourselves and about the world and how wrong the other people are in that moment. And then that got made fun of too. And maybe what we will eventually realize is that, yes, a moment, a group shared moment, that is the thing. Profundity can occur in that kind of environment. But man, it is really tough to bottle that up and reproduce it and give it to other people and to have them understand what happened there. It's just one of those, you just kind of got to be there sorts of things. But at the same time, some of those moments in history are gigantic. They are sea change moments where a group of people become unified behind an idea or a person, and a ball starts rolling. And even though not everybody was in the room when the moment happened, the awe that occurred in that moment still leaks out into bigger stuff. No matter how much we might rightly make fun of artificial moments from time to time, this is still a thing. So let's just pretend that your name is Matthew. I'm not even pretending. And that you're sitting down to write a book to describe the most bizarre but powerful, transcendent, spiritual, truest, realist thing you've ever seen in your whole life and that you could imagine anyone ever seeing in the entirety of anybody's lives. And, well, one of the things that really marked it was that you've never seen people respond en masse to anybody's public speaking or public demeanor like they did to the guy who is the subject of this book that you are writing. And spoiler, it's Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ, the Messiah. And so you're Matthew and you sit down and you got to make an editorial decision, right? You got to be like, well, do I even try the slow clap moment? Or do I just skip that? Because you can never really recapture it or relay it. Well, I'll tell you what Matthew decided. He decided that he was just going to acknowledge that some of them happened, but that he was going to do it very, very briefly rather than trying to slather on a bunch of emotion to fruitlessly and impotently try to tell you what it felt like. And instead, he's going to go the efficient route and just be like, no, they were in awe. They were moved. They were amazed. This one really blew people's minds in ways that never happens otherwise. And we get one of those moments in Matthew chapter 2 at the end of the passage that we've been looking at, where the Sadducees come at Jesus with their own attempt at a parable, but they kind of botch the way it's presented and articulated. And still, they think they got him real good. But then Jesus in Matthew 22:29 says, you are in error. He's talking to the Sadducees now because you don't know the scriptures or the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They'll be like the angels in heaven. But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. As we discussed yesterday, as a modern audience, I don't know, it just takes a little work to understand why that would inspire awe in anyone, because he's talking to a different audience at a different time with different concerns and different questions. And so we had to unpack it a little bit, but I think after doing so, we're like, oh yeah, I think I see the power of that would prompt a response like this. Verse 33, when the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. Boom, that's it. No, everybody cried or clapped or anything like that. Just they were astonished. You can take that truth proposition or you can leave it implicitly, says Matthew. But this is not the first time that we've seen something like this. This whole shock and awe because of the teachings of Jesus thing, as best as I can recall, starts back at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Just a second, though. I'm going to check real quick to see if it's just narratively described at the end of 4, because at the end of chapter 4, there's like a big summary of just in general, he's healing people and stuff. All right, let's find out together. Ready? All right, he calls the disciples in Matthew 4:23. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee and the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. All right, he doesn't say amazed or in awe, but I think we can count that, right? You can count it if you want. You can not count it if you want. I'm going to count that as a description of a group response to Jesus that was apparently significant enough that people would drop, like whether they were doing work-wise or family-wise or whatever their responsibilities were, and hike for 20, 50, 100 more miles to go and hang out with the dude they've never met before as word of who he is and what he does spreads. And so that initial sense of awe and interest is what I guess prompts the Sermon on the Mount to happen. Beginning of chapter 5, you'll recall that Jesus goes up on the mountainside to teach his disciples. It does say that, right? I'm getting that right? Yeah, his disciples came to him and he began to teach them. So you've got a whole bunch of other people listening in, but once again, you've got that trichotomy of the inner circle making up part of the crowds that follow Jesus. The squishy middle, who are the vast majority who don't know quite what to make of him. Sounds like that's a whole lot of the people who were described at the end of chapter 4. And then the people who don't like him very much, the religious leaders, the exact people we're in a showdown with here in 22. But what I'm talking about are those awe moments that are hard to capture. And we get our first one of those that is explicit at the end of chapter 7, end of the Sermon on the Mount. Here it says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. The teachers of the law apparently bantered back and forth about different ideas and which interpretive matrix for how to read what we would call the Old Testament or how to sort out legal matters that overlap with politics and civic stuff. They would debate and bicker about that stuff, much like the impotence of our cable news bickering, like the mindless prattle of our pundit class who are entirely unprincipled and just yell whatever their side needs them to yell at any given moment. That's the kind of stuff that doesn't smack of authority or credibility at all. That kind of stuff smacks of a joke, and you take every word that comes out of the mouths of that bickering pundit class with a grain of salt. But this sounded different. This stood out to the original audience. Instead of being like it meant so much to them and their hearts were all full and they felt great and happy and they were excited and they all felt emotions and feelings they'd never felt before. Instead, it's like this was different than anything they'd ever heard before. They'd heard talks. These weren't ignorant rubes. This just smacked of something much, much more authoritative. And then you get to the beginning of chapter 9, which is deliberately in stark contrast to the end of chapter 8, where Jesus went across the sea, cast the demons out into the pigs, and all the people from over there are like, could you just leave? It's weird. You don't really, you're not interested. Could you just go away, please? And Jesus is like, okie dokie, bye. And he goes back over to roughly Capernaum, and we have this interaction where everybody's so excited to see him again, so they're glad to have him back at least. But it's that three-part crowd, the inner circle, the squishy middle, the angry outsiders, and they got the house crowded up so much that a crippled guy can't get into the room, so his buddies lower him down from the roof, which is a pretty bold act. Jesus forgives him. You'll recall people are mad about that. He's like, oh, well, which is harder, to forgive sins or to tell this guy to get up and walk? But that you would know the Son of Man has the authority to forgive sins. He tells the guy to get up and take your mat and walk. And the guy does. And then listen to this, verse 8. When the crowd saw this, they were filled with awe and they praised God who had given such authority to men. What are the two components we're seeing? Again, my friends, pattern is developing. Authority that doesn't look like anything else you see in this world, and awe in response. So now we've had a minimum of two of these moments that you can't really pass along to people, but you can at least tell them that it happened. And this is what people did. One is just over straight up teaching with boldness and authority. The other happens because Jesus demonstrates his authority over like the physical world. And then just a page later in Matthew chapter 9, verse 33, Jesus casts out demons from some people, and it says, when the demon was driven out, the man who had been mute spoke. The crowd was amazed and said, nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel. They are understanding this isn't normal. Now, you'll notice they're not like, praise to the Messiah, the Son of God, Christ who is God in the flesh, Emmanuel, God with us. It's not like they get it yet. They're just smart enough to look at the situation and be like, dang, we just saw a thing. We've got more to think about on this motif of the crowds being amazed and the evolution of the attitudes toward the middle part, the squishy middle part of the crowd toward Jesus, and that's just going to require another conversation tomorrow. So we are going to suspend operations right there. We are in rain delay. That makes it sound negative. We are in optimistic suspension. Looking forward to our conversation tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.